Hello, welcome back, everyone. So, as I was saying, the agenda is empty, so we might start with the status as usual. I'm gonna name some names. Let's start with Igor. Do you have any updates you want to share, Igor? I did throw in a quick reply to your RS-232 diag today. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, so I was supposed to create a discussion on Rust diags, but I haven't. So probably next time I'll just move some information from my doc to that discussion so that it's easier to discuss. Also, I saw your comment on RS-232 diag. Thanks for your encouragement. It's probably a good idea to develop it on GitHub directly, especially because my customer probably can just directly use it from GitHub. I will confirm this. Also, there is a utility actually for testing RS-232 that already supports software loopback, and it doesn't mention any specific RS-232 adapters. So I suspect it's universal, but I'm not quite sure. I'll mention it in comments. Maybe I'll just wrap this utility into our OCP format reporting format. Oh, sorry, OCP result reporting format. The problem is the utility is written in C, and we don't have C library for it. So probably I need to use C++ implementation. Right now, it's not buildable. I tried to build it before. At least main branch of it is not buildable. So I'm not sure what to do exactly. Maybe I'll do parsing with Python, similarly to what I did to memtester. Yep, that's it.
Right. Thanks, Igor. So I would suggest you put all of these comments in the discussion thread there and all of the options, and we can continue that.
Right. I'll mention everything there.
Okay. Cool. So next up, maybe Arun. Do you have some updates on the OSFCI?
Yeah. So I think our process with business legal for API downloads has concluded successfully. The European instance of the CI is up and running as well. So I'll be able to dedicate some cycles to start, loading up with what we need during this month of March. And I'll be working with you on that.
Very nice. Thanks for the update. And a question related to this, which is, the understanding that we had a while ago on OSFCI was that it's kind of a nice tool for users to have in order to maybe demo diags or see how they behave on actual hardware. What if we were to run the GitHub built artifacts on the OSFCI hardware? We need to establish some limits of usage and stuff like that. But would that be possible?
Yes, because it's as is commonly known and through many of our talks, we have stated that it is all enabled through the APIs. So our own web app uses those APIs. So GitHub Actions wiring those up to run the CI tool. But I think what you said about resource limits is a genuine concern. So we might have to be careful around that, because once you lock a server board for a test, it is locked till you release it.
Right. So what I imagine is the CI on GitHub, the GitHub Actions don't really run frequently because on most of the repos that I set up, the releases are mostly made on the main branch. So when you push a merge commit to the main branch, there's a release happening. I suppose there's also tests run on the dev branch, but again, that kind of depends on the frequency of the PR. So at the end of the day, I don't think they will be locked for a huge amount of time. But if you have an API to control the limits and or do some throttling, that would be useful.
Yeah, so the way we currently work is kind of Neanderthal or basic, which is that once you establish a lock, there's a time limit that goes on. So you have the resource for about an hour unless you release it ahead. So that is roughly how it's controlled right now, but that is itself configurable. So depending on how we shape this, we can certainly figure things out and set it to run at certain specific times and so forth.
Okay, cool. So sounds like a plan. If we get this going, this should be like a good starting point for the thread with running on actual hardware to test the code bases.
Yes, that's our key differentiator, which is that everything on that CI is being, deployed on actual hardware.
Right. Okay. Thanks for the update. Next up, Young, do you have any updates on the virtual clients?
Hey, Adrian, oh yeah, we don't have specific updates. We added more support for more Linux distros and just working on just like code stability, like fix a couple bugs. So no major updates.
Right. Thanks for the update. I don't recall exactly if there was supposed to be a thread started on the topic of the what do I call this? The aggregation of diags. I don't know if you had a chance to speak with Giovanni in the meantime.
No, I didn't. I don't remember. Did we intend to create a GitHub discussion somewhere or?
Yeah, there is an action for a GitHub discussion for myself from last week, but I wasn't sure if this was specifically with you and Giovanni. I will actually, yeah, I'll actually add to that note to clarify. Okay, cool. Thanks for the update, Young. Since Rajat is here, Rajat, I don't know if stuff has been happening with the CTAM repo. I did see some PRs recently, but maybe you have a more official update for us.
Yeah, so we've been working on the developer and plus the developer local branches. I think we have reached a maturity where we can actually push it, create a PR to main. You'll probably see that coming up sometime this week or likely. When that happens, that's when you will have to approve, correct? Or will I have the, do I have the permission to approve there? When
you have full, yeah, you have full ownership of the repo.
Okay, great. Then thanks. I
mean, if something isn't working, let me know and we'll figure it out. But yeah, you should.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so been focused. We created only framework level changes. Barring that, when we last time we discussed about the scoring strategies, I've created one separate discussion in the GitHub page as you suggested. Then on we also with help from NVIDIA, we got the whole tool to be binary packageable. So there's a flow for that in case there are teams within the industry players who prefer an exe than a Python repo, right? So that also was managed. And then I think I brought this up last time where we created a scheme for internal testing. There are always concerns about so we want everybody to adopt this tool, not just for compliance testing, but we realized it makes sense to let them adopt it for their internal validation as well. The only flip side of that is the concerns of privacy, and if you have any IP concerns where you have certain scenarios which you don't want to release to the outer world, but you still want to make the most of it and reuse the framework itself, the big framework for internal validation purposes. So we created a documentation on how that what's the ideal way to have that, so that people don't accidentally push internal IP code out into the external GitHub. That aside, we also have some scenarios where which are test cases where we perform a clone of another repo, like we had the DMTF service validator repo. So there's a test case which does a clone of that repo, performs an run using that repo, and then deletes the repo at the end. I'm guessing if you guys have any advice on that, like how we should ideally be doing that kind of action, let me know. But yeah, I think we'll see a lot of these coming up in next year or plus for this repo. Yeah.
So thanks for the update, Rajat. So you had a couple of questions. Could you phrase them in a more formal way and put them on a GitHub discussion topic so that we have a written format for them?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, so I'll add an action for you on the notes. And once that's ready, feel free to put a link in the notes, or we can make it more public in the next meeting, just to get more eyes on it. And a second question.
Yep.
I know Bhushan was kind of dealing with this, but maybe you have some information. There was a discussion at one point last year, I think, talking about getting some NVIDIA hardware to Arun, to HP, so that we could run the CTAM diag on the OSFCI setup. Is that still ongoing?
That's I actually stopped following once Bhushan took over that. Let me follow up with Bhushan on that. Thanks for reminding.
All right, thank you. Cool. So next up, maybe Satish. I don't see Hua on the call, but if you would like to make a quick summary of the discussions that happened last week.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Yeah, so last week we had a almost 3-hour discussion with Hua, Adrian, and myself, and going through the various possibilities of representing the output of LMT. And so the summary is we have identified some common ground, like the tool is slightly different between the way Meta implemented versus Google's implementation. So we tried to converge on the output, and then we found some common ground, and we started to continue the discussion in the GitHub discussion thread. But for now, it looks like we have a common understanding of the DUT, like the overall system, how it looks like, and the way the user is allowed to pick up what kind of run they can run. It could be a spot check, like they can check on particular spot and see if the margin is good, or they can run a scan, like or the entire eye region, like eye height and eye width. So those things are common, and we have put our proposals, both our proposals, in the GitHub, and I'm yet to go through Hua's proposal and see what we can merge on both sides. Since Hua is out, I'm going to take a stab at his proposal and look at it and see what is the most common way we can represent the data. But yeah, I think it needs one more last round of discussion to make sure the final output specification, and then we will update the thread, and then we can start with the implementation. Yeah, sorry, Adrian, is it possible to add, I tried to add the meeting minutes or notes or the topics in the OCP meeting invite. Every time I try to find, I couldn't find it. So sorry, it's off topic.
The meeting invite. Yeah,
Yeah.
let me know on the internal
Thank
chat,
you.
and I'll handle
Thank
that.
you. Sounds good. And that's pretty much with the LMT side of stuff. Let me know if you want to dig deeper. I'm on my phone. If you can pull up the discussion, I can walk through if you need more details.
I think that's okay for now.
Okay.
Thanks for the updates. And yeah, so basically the current status for that is we have the ideas of how to proceed with the output, and we have identified technically some multiple goals that the DIAG would satisfy there, because Satish has a specific goal for the LMT tool, which looks for validating. Correct me if I'm wrong, Satish, but your view looks for validating that the hardware can support the given margins within some given bit error rate, for example.
Correct.
Whereas Hua is looking to discover how large the margin is in terms of acceptable error rate.
Correct. Yeah, that is right. So in both our cases, the tool supports both the scenarios, like a spot check versus iScan. But just that our primary use case for us in our Metas implementation is spot check, which is targeted mainly for manufacturing and data center implementation. I think from Hua's implementation perspective, his primary use case is iScan. Like they need to find like it's more of a bench level characterization tool. But yeah, in both the cases, we should be able to run both these cases, but just that we are trying to optimize the output to support both these cases.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. I'm curious if we can actually run this on the OSFCI at some point. I don't see why that would be.
Yeah, all we need is a PCI Gen 4 device. Or a PCI device which supports lane margining. Let's put it that way. All
right. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But it sounds like an interesting idea, especially if we like automate it, on the GitHub Actions. Okay. Thanks for the update, Satish. Vincent, do you have any updates for us?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple updates, but I had a quick question for Satish that I was debating taking offline, but I'll ask it here. Satish, looking at the integration you've been doing with the manufacturing test, I've looked at the output of the current LMT and the line delimited JSON. Right. And I observed that some of the lines, for example, the standalone output didn't have all the artifacts, such as test run artifact and test end artifact, which makes the entire output not necessarily parsable to visualize as a standalone. Is this a known current limitation being worked on, or how do we approach this? Because even though it validates as valid per line delimited JSON passes validation, but as a whole, we don't pass validation. So I was curious to talk about this briefly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the main push behind why we need to expedite this output format specification. Currently, it was blocked due to there was no consensus between the two implementers to see what is the right way to go forward. Choose whatever DAC they want to run, but output should be standardized. So that was blocked for a while. I think now we are seeing some progress. I think at the end of this discussion, we should have a common output format, which will be implemented in the LMT tool. So currently it's like a -o JSON, -o CSV. Those are two output formats we support. And eventually you'll see a -o OCP TV that will provide all the test run artifacts like what we are supporting.
So currently the one that is being run in manufacturing, is that actually a sort of massaged output from the -O CSV, or is that the development
Correct.
-O OCP? Oh, I see. Okay. I see. So
Yeah,
the
it's a
OCP
currently
binding,
manufacturing. The recommendation is to correct. So I think they are using -O CSV at this point. That's easy for them to do post processing. Currently, they cannot do a pass fail criteria reliably because the parsing is fragile. So the recommendation is to just get started with the tool integration and things. But for output parsing, the recommendation is to wait for the OCP TV output. So that's the push on my side to get this thing going. And I was getting some help from Adrian and Karen on side to get this moving. Yeah.
okay, thanks. I may ping you offline. I've been meaning to anyways,
Sounds
but
good. Yeah.
I think the setting that one aside, I think the agreement here, so that there's no ambiguity, is from a validator perspective, and maybe that's a question for you, Adrian, since you did the biggest lift on the validator. Currently, if you take line delimited valid output, it will still pass. But if we don't have a sort of comprehensive full output validator, is there value in having that?
No. There is. The validator actually looks at the whole output holistically. So it will go line by line and validate that your actual line delimited JSON is valid and it has the necessary fields and all of that. But there's also validations on the whole output. So for example, if your sequence number is skipping ints, for example, or the timestamps are weird or something like that. So we can add extra rules that look at the whole output.
Okay, so the one that is currently documented in the validator, the spec validator on GitHub, the one that is in Go, can support a full output validator, or it needs a little tweak?
Yes, no, it does that already. I think I don't remember right now off the top of my head, but I think the sequence number check is actually implemented. So it's looking at all of the messages.
So when I ran it on that output from the LMT, and not to dwell too much on this, but that output was missing the test run artifact, was missing the test run start, things like that, and that was not called out. You know, running with the schema pointing to root as.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see what you mean. I'm not saying all of the rules are implemented right now. I'm saying the code base as it is right now can support adding these extra rules.
I see. Got it. Okay. All right. On general updates, you know, we've been talking a bit about having some ODM engagements in these meetings, and to that end, I'll be actually traveling to meet with some of our ODMs in a couple of weeks and sort of set some parameters for the test and validation engagement. I know a few others on this call have had similar discussions and engagement, but that's sort of an effort that's going on. How this will transpire, whether this will be sort of, you know, people calling in and participating in this meeting, or being more on the contribution on GitHub, is still a bit TBD. But I did want to give a heads up that yeah, we've had sort of hyperscalers and enterprise folks here, but we've been missing kind of the hardware folks, and hopefully that will change soon. So yeah, not a very actionable update just yet on this one, just a bit of a heads up. Yes, Marcos.
You are muted, Marcus. Okay, sure.
There we go. Sorry, the mute button was not misbehaving. Hey, so is your idea here, and you may have this is maybe undefined, but the idea for them to contribute to creating diags, or are you thinking about starting with the idea of just getting their
their internal frameworks and test systems prepared to work with Melton or OCP Diag as an input type?
More of the former, so contributing to diags and really making OCP diags part of their workflows. And in fact, that ties to other discussions going on internally at the company here around specs and product requirement documents, and how we go from a requirement to a spec to an actual validation of that spec. And so the intent here is OCP Diag would be the channel for validating that hardware delivered is in compliance to the spec. And I know that has been the common theme, right, since we started with DCMHS and other related initiatives going on. I don't see Dan on the call to also add to that. But Marcos, I hope that aligns as well pretty clearly with the direction that you see and are taking.
Yeah, so we've started already working on. I mean, we've shoved our test framework down our ODM's throat, so they have to use it. So, but we have already started getting diags developed by some of the ODMs.
Yeah.
So, and it's basically what we've asked them to do is convert all the test coverage that they developed that wasn't provided by us in that format already into that Melton OCP Diag format. And I will tell you that we've been leveraging Adrian's work here because they've all been doing it using that Python implementation, which is spectacular. So if Adrian, you're missing kudos, this is me giving you like huge props here.
Thanks, Marcus. I'm sure there's stuff missing still from that API. So if there's contributions, that would be excellent.
So yeah, that what you just said, Marcos, is exactly the path we're also on. So the contributions coming in for anything that's an NPI or other will be in compliance with OCP Diag. So more on this to come, but that's going to be the updates, and whether we see some folks from those companies start joining the call is what I'm hoping to figure out a little bit more as I'm visiting and chatting with them, because there is a sort of incentive difference between this group here, meeting here, and sort of the execution and usage of the output of what we produce. So I want to make sure we don't have an impedance mismatch in how we sort of engage. Other than that, that's pretty much it. We still have every single test generating OCP TV output. That's not going to change, but we are still also working on, I know Dan had mentioned this visualization. We have a crude renderer and visualizer, and I think the plan was to align with the one that somebody at Google was going to contribute. So I don't know if we have an update on this one from anyone at Google.
I'll have to ping Dan about that. My last discussion with him was that he would publish that code base.
Yeah. Okay. That's
all
it.
Right. Cool. Thanks. Kiran, you wanna add something? Just unmuted.
Oh,
sorry, I muted you, Kiran. There was background noise.
yeah. Is it still bad or?
There is some background noise, but I saw you unmuted, so I was wondering
Okay.
if you want to add something to what Vincent said.
Yeah, no, not related to this, but actually we had an internal discussion. Someone by name Tom was to join. He didn't, but I quickly wanted to mention what it was and get your feedback on that. So the OCP spec actually specifies measurements and other artifacts. One thing which this group of multiple teams, in fact, what they're looking to is to sort of standardize the naming of the measurements, because they have multiple diags which within Google internally naming different things different way. It's hard for them to sort of know what they want to look for. So they want to have something like a subsystem name underscore measurement name kind of syntax. They have a proposal for it. They are sort of pushing us to change our internal diags to conform to that. And it made sense to also actually get a feel of what the overall forum here thinks about it, because it's not something part of the current standard, and we are sort of, it's more of a guideline in terms of what it has to be, what measurements have to be named as. So for instance, if there is a fan diag, right? So today we have a measurement name called measured fan speed at say 50 PWM, measures fan speed underscore 50 is the name of the measurement name, and then the value is whatever RPM it is. They have a syntax which says fan underscore speed 100 or something like that, right? So some of them is going to be superficially different, some of them are going to be substantially different. But the fact is that they want to specify or constrain the names to a particular namespace, so to speak. So wanted to check what the opinions or what thoughts are here in terms of moving the standardization to an OCP level. Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Karen. I'm gonna start with a quick question myself. If you have examples on this already, it would be useful to start this as a GitHub discussion. I know I keep saying GitHub discussion all over the place, but it's like the medium that we have for written recordings. And my opinion would be we can have guidelines, and there's been discussion on guidelines before in this group for various other things. I don't necessarily think that we should standardize on the field name of the measurement, because that would be very inflexible in terms of the spec itself. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah. So Tom is in my team. We've been having discussions. I've thought of this sort of request as something like a style guide. In the idea of like source code, our spec is that the thing will compile, and then the style guide tells you how to name functions in that way. But it's not something that should necessarily be in the spec, but more of I think the word you guys use is guidelines and a style guide or a best practices sort of thing, where it's really just something for consideration, but not a hard requirement from the point of view of the spec. Internally at Google, just like our style guide is enforceable, I feel like that's totally doable. But and I think that's kind of where the boundary exists for it to be a hard requirement versus just a suggestion.
Sounds like we're kind of aligned on this. At least me and Marcos are on the call. But if anyone else has opinions, feel free to raise a hand. I'm gonna go back to if there's some examples to this and some more formal phrasing that you want to have there, Kieran. We can
Yeah,
take
I
that
will
and then
get
move it to a document.
yeah, I will ask Tom to start a discussion on that. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to give you guys an idea of what's being suggested is it's the idea is to identify major components and not by name but by function. So instead of our Nick called Larry reporting and someone putting a measurement that embeds the name of the device, we said no, don't do that. That's awful. So, but if you do need to identify a piece of a measurement and tie it to a piece of hardware, do it to a standardized known name for the functional block. So DIMM, CPU, NIC, that sort of thing. And so they've developed a list of major components that are kind of functional blocks, and they want to try to standardize on prefixing all of the measurements to those with one of these items and non-enumerated, etc. So that's the guidance, but I think seeing it in writing, there's docs being published or written and reviewed today internally to drive this effort. So I will ask Tom to go to GitHub and make sure he's joined the group, etc., and start the discussion there.
Okay, that's great. So I added an action item in the notes for you, Marcos. I don't have Kieran on the meeting notes document, so Kieran, if you want to be there, I just posted the link in the chat. Feel free to do a share request. Right, so I'm gonna change topics a bit because I see Venkat just joined the call. So Venkat, I was asking Rajat earlier about status on the CTAM, but I'm on the CTAM tool, but I'm also kind of interested what is our internal status on researching the use and the current use on the CTAM tool.
Yeah, so we're in the process of like automating CTAM with our internal test infrastructure. I think mainly we're looking at intercepting like the next NPI that we're going to do with CTAM. Right now, we're thinking of it as as a per firmware release compliance kind of checks, right? Because this aligns with like our goal of like making sure we're compliant to the 3 specs like for the management interface firmware and the RAS part. So, and the other use case we're also thinking about is I'm going to talk to Anil today about like potentially contributing some test cases for the RAS side that is worked on for the 0.7 spec. So I don't know if that give a picture. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for that.
Hey, sorry, Venkat, you also touched upon the emulator aspect, right?
Yes. Yeah. One thing I talked to Rajat was so onboarding this for the discrete or the hybrid use cases was a little kind of bit of discovery process. So I was thinking that probably making this work with like an emulator, Redfish emulation using the Redfish kind of the DMTF's Redfish emulator tool, right? And exporting a profile that can work with, but help with the onboarding because of the number of artifacts that need to be kind of initially tuned and setting up the SSH tunnel and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, adding the emulator would be a game changer, just to add on, right? But yeah, I hear the challenges as well that come with it. Sorry, Adrian, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So I was going to ask, is this something that you're working with Rajat on? Something that would be put in the CTAM repo itself, or is it internal?
The idea is to put it in CTAM repo. I haven't really started like on the Redfish emulator part. I was just kind of floating that idea with Rajat to see if that would be helpful. But yeah, I think once we get it working internally, yeah, we can potentially contribute that, I think.
Got it. Okay. Any other updates that you may have, Venkat, maybe on the SSD diags? I know the deadline is in March now. I don't know if anything changed since last week.
No, yeah, for the SSD, it's still I think end of March. I think it's going along okay. The other thing, I see Giovanni is not on the call. I know he started with like the Rust wrapper for OCP TV. So I think that's coming along okay too. I don't know if Igor he synced with you on this. He said, I mean, at least he's having a prototype, right? Like without any measurement series or test artifact, just the run artifact and stuff. So he said once he has a POC, he'll kind of be able to show something here.
Okay. Yeah, I have an action to start an email with Igor as well on that topic. That hasn't happened yet, but if you're saying it's still in progress, then that's not delayed at this point. Okay. If I missed anyone with the updates, please let me know. In the meantime, we have about 10-ish minutes if anyone wants to raise any topic. If not, I have added one on the agenda based on some discussion on the LMT diag. All right, so I'll ask this question then. Part of the things that I've observed in this discussion with Hua and Satish on the PCI LMT tool in defining how the output gets mapped was that there is a process in the LMT tool which does multiple things concurrently. They actually work in parallel. So there's multiple receiver endpoints on the PCI link that get measured in parallel. So one of the questions that came up was, is the semantic of the test step completely sequential, or can test steps be run in parallel? And my guidance there was that the test steps, the semantic is that they are run in sequential order. So if you look at the an output of specified by the OCP TV spec, you have the test step start and the test step end as like the big block, but you should not have another step start until you have finished the previous step, in case there are all of the messages which are part of the test step itself, and they can get mixed between the steps. There is an identifier in the test step related artifacts which say which test step they actually belong to, but I'm not sure whether my my thinking here is entirely I wouldn't say accurate, but if it's accepted by all of the interpretation of the spec. So I'm kind of asking this group right now, in your understanding, could the test steps in an output be run in parallel? And if so, what does that look like? And an alternative to this, which I was thinking of maybe as an RFC at some point, is what if the steps are sequential by nature, and then there's another concept which would be like a concurrency group or parallel group, where you have the steps or some children messages put into this group which clearly shows in the output that all of these are concurrent and they get synchronized by the parallel group ending message. I'm sure I explained that as clear as mud, because it's a very ad hoc explanation. But I'm curious about opinions on this or questions. Maybe I could explain some aspects better. Go ahead, Mason.
Yeah, Adrian, I think going back to the definition we had for the test step, reading it for anyone who doesn't have it right in front of them, I went back when you asked the question. So we have the test step as a high-level container for all the execution artifacts that are emitted by a particular section of a test run. So fundamentally, we say a test run consists of 0 to n test steps. If I stick to that model and I look at some of the tests that we run, we could conceivably run test steps in parallel and have the test run itself sort of be the barrier, right? In conceptually. So I don't see that as formally having to have a test step be a linear sequential ordering, and I could see parallelism weave its way. Now the sequence IDs do matter, I think, in the order in which the test steps are initiated, but I don't think we should formally restrict what we do with the way parallelism is embedded in the execution of the test. That's my thought.
So that a question arises from that, which is if the steps can run in parallel. First of all, you have identified the step sequence, right? The message sequence rather, and that kind of becomes a bit ambiguous because you don't have a signal in the output itself telling you these steps are now run in parallel. So it could get confusing for a parser because it would be unable to say, okay, these sequence numbers are actually something useful that I can look at for the sequential aspect of the steps, or they don't mean anything, or at least they don't imply an ordering. They could just have the semantic of, okay, you're missing messages. So in like a TCP-ACK sort of thing, right? But the main point is that this isn't clear. So if, as far as I can tell, so if we are to say, okay, the test run is the container for parallelism or concurrency in this case, then that should be fine if you always say that the test run is supposed to have concurrency inside it. So that's why I'm kind of thinking of a separate concept, which is like a parallel group, right? And you say, okay, everything inside this group, we have no expectations on the actual ordering of how they were executed. So it's like a particular aspect, a particular message that gives you the signal that inside this section, everything is concurrent to whatever extent. At the end of the day, the way I'm seeing this, visualizing it, is kind of a graph where you can diverge into multiple nodes, and those could run in parallel, or you have nodes that run sequentially. But we need something specifically in the output to say, this was sequential, this was parallel. Otherwise, it gets confusing, right? If you don't have that signal. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, my thoughts are similar to what Vincent was saying. So I think I don't remember if you have a specific DAG which has parallelism, but when we try to sort of in other discussions try to bring in this notion that these are implicitly sequential, there was pushback. I can think of perhaps storage DAGs which are long running and they would necessarily be parallel. What we certainly would want is some disambiguation in the artifacts to indicate which steps they belong to. I don't know the spec today clearly enough if we have anything, but that is something which we can have. Okay.
Yes, there is an identifier which says this artifact belongs to this step.
Yeah, I think so. I think innate parallelism, I think, is probably good. With respect to what you were mentioning of a concurrency group, I was thinking if it makes sense to have a concept of hierarchical steps instead. Probably it's the same thing what you say, but sub steps instead of a step. If we need that notion of diverging and converging, that's another thing we can think of to get that. But I think steps per se, I think they should probably remain concurrent because the spec today doesn't specifically constrain them to be sequential.
All right, go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah, I think back to some of our load and monitor type diags that I've discussed in the past, where we start a monitor, then we start a load, and then we run the monitor in parallel. There's versions where we've run that as two separate diags, and there's also versions where we combine the two. And so that's a place where we would end up with parallel steps that happen within a diag. And I believe that's exactly why we added, like, why that sequence ID is included in all the artifacts, so that we don't have to stick to ordering to infer what each artifact maps to. And I think for the point of if what we're trying to solve is a way to properly visualize, like from a UI perspective, we use the sequential based on when you started the step on how to display the data. And if we wanted to demonstrate in a UI that these things run in parallel, we can infer that from timestamps of when things started and stopped, because we have a begin and an end for each step to demonstrate that, if that is something that's important to visualize.
I think that would be useful, the timestamp information in that representation, but I don't think that is sufficient in the output to describe what the diag did. And at the end of the day, the output is also supposed to describe the structure of the execution of the diagnostic, right? So I'm still kind of thinking of this additional signaling to say that there was concurrency, not just infer it from the timestamps. I'll keep it as an open question, though. Go ahead, Vincent. We have 30 seconds, I think.
Yeah, no, I did. I think you just said where I was going to go. I think there were two ways of interpreting your question. One was whether test steps should be inherently sort of redefined as being linear, monotonically, a sequence, a linear serial execution of steps. But what you're really asking is, in the event when there's parallelism, should we be more explicit about the fact that these were parallel executions? So, which is a slightly different interpretation. I don't change my mind on this. I think this is kind of reserved as an exercise for the test writer, and how this is communicated. It does feel like a very particular diag specific, because we have test step ID, right? And test step ID is a UUID. It is not monotonically increasing, unlike the sequence number. The sequence number is really only meant for us to ensure that we haven't lost messages. But the test step IDs are free form. So how they're linked to each other is not enforced. So I think keeping it simpler and supports both sort of parallel and non-parallel execution, which to me is sufficient for now.
If I could add, by simply just having the start message of a following step before we got the end message of the like the current step, it's already
implying that we're running things in parallel.
Yeah, but I'm not sure it's enough to reconstruct the graph of the execution. That's why I'm saying. We are 1 minute over. Satish, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I think we should think beyond the test step. I think we should look at measurements. In fact, I have to look at how do we represent measurements, which are taken in parallel. That's my comment.
All right. So thanks everyone for the discussion here. I may start a GitHub discussion and I'll ask people to join there with opinions. And for today, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.